Hello everyone! Today I will tell you about my new project, one of the most famous light tank of World War II. In this video series I plan to recreate a historical photo taken in 1941 in the territory of Soviet Union. First I need to say that this model arrived straight from the manufacturer's assembly line, so this kit is new. The kit consists of several sprues with neat details. Particularly impressive are the pins on the turret. But let's get back to assembly. And first, I cleaned the parts from the excess plastic and began gluing them together, using a new glue that I showcased in the previous video. The turret turned out well. The only difficulty arose with the gun. It needed trimming to be positioned correctly. Another problem I realized only after finishing the work on the cupola and visors. I discovered that the front visor was broken. I decided not to repair it and to mask the defect during painting. Now I moved on to the whole parts, and I can say that these whole parts assembled without any problems. I just had to trim excess plastic in some places. And now the PC-38 hull is ready and this tank looks not bad. By the way, I noticed that the PC-38 tank has become popular on YouTube. Recently, both Nick and Fazer built it. It's funny how everyone has taken on this model at the same time. Now we talk about chassis. And the chassis in this kit is one of the most convenient I have worked with. The parts of the chassis are large and easy to paint even after the tracks are installed. The tracks themselves are also pleasant to assemble. All parts fit easily into their slots, and the chance of making a mistake is partially eliminated. Now the all main detail of the tank completely assembled, and we move on to the more exciting part. Adding equipment and cargo to the tank. The first element will be a lock, for which I am using a processed bamboo stick. Honestly, I choose this specific historical photo for the diorama because of this lock. It adds a special atmosphere and realism to the model. And in the end, it turned out to be an excellent addition detail. The next element is a box on the left side of the tank. My model differs from the original, so I made the box myself, using a plastic angle and thin plates. And I also added hangers for the lid. This way I got a realistic model of the box that matches what I seen in the photo. Now let's see at all our stowage. There will be 4 jerrycans on the tank and I intentionally made them different colors, since real tanks often use jerrycans for different types of fuel. I plan to make jerrycans for gasoline and kerosene, and one small jerrycan for oil. Most of the parts of the model, including these jerrycans and box, were created by me, except for the MG34 machine gun, which I downloaded from the decals 3D website. I will leave a link to the model and my page for downloading other parts in the description. I also plan to add some tarps, which I create from milliput, but for now we need to install our leftover parts. It will be more challenging to place the tools, such as shovel, hammer, picks and bar. Some of them will need to be secured under other parts, like under the locks, to maintain the composition, while the tools could have been arranged more conveniently for visibility. That would disrupt the historical accuracy and realism of the diorama. I strive to create a model that accurately reflects the appearance of the tank in 1941. Avoiding the mistake I made in previous projects. Of course, modeling allows for a creativity approach to the project, but this time I wanted to do everything correctly and pay close attention to historical details. So all tools find their place, and gluing the boxes and jerrycans went without any issue. But the additional detail on the turret required more effort. To add a helmet to the turret, I had to sacrifice one of the figures, since my FDM 3D printer couldn't print the helmet in 1/72 scale, with sufficient detail. I also placed several contents and meth tin around the helmet, trying to make them noticeable and natural on the model. After that, I moved on to the towing cable. I made it from heated and stretched sprue to achieve a realistic thickness for the 1/72 scale. The resulting cable looked quite convincing. And now left and back side of the tank look good, but the right side of the tank remained empty. But before adding some additional detail to right side of the tank, I decided to create tarpaulin using two-component material called milliput. Using silicone sculpting tool, I was able to give the tarp the desired shape and natural appearance. And I can say it became an excellent addition to the model. And of course after painting this detail will look even better. Second tarp I placed it on the left side of the tank. The next day the model already looks more cohesive, especially with the addition of small jerrycan that I managed to print on my Bumble Up 1 Mini. This is only one detail which I plan to add on the right side of the tank. And now I can say that assembling of the tank was finished, and this time to choose figure for our future diorama. Since the theme depicts the tank in motion, I decided to use seated soldiers. The two sets from Arion was suitable, but unfortunately the figures have rather poor quality faces. I used a hand duriel and a set of heads purchased online. With the help of powerful glue, I was able to create figures with improved detailing. As a demonstration, I placed these figures right in a peak that I printed on my new 3D printer. And now we can move on to painting. We begin as usual with priming. After the primer dries, I move on to the base color. To achieve panzer gray color, I mix in dectal color and black paint, and covered all the model part with this color. After drying, I add post-shading. I lighten the base color a bit and apply it to the necessary areas to emphasize volume. After that, I let my tank to dry and focus on the figures. I'll try to make my best figure so far. And for painting, I use my standard method. A base color, then a wash of shadow flakes, detailing the eyes and correcting minor mistakes. Painting took a whole evening, but the result is worth it. I am particularly proud of one figure, it turned out just excellent. Unfortunately, I can't add third figure on the model, because I accidentally burned his ass. And this figure won't be included in the final demonstration. Now let's return to the tank. For the wash, I'm using an oil paint again, as the previous option from AK Interactive turned out to be too harsh and inconvenient. I mean, wash from AK Interactive smelled too much, and I don't like it. But working with wash based on oil paint was a bit difficult. Not difficult to add, but difficult to remove leftover. I think my solvent is weak, and in the end I had to repaint the damaged parts of the tank almost entirely, trying to give it a life-worn effect. After that, for shadows on the small details, I decided to switch to acrylic paint to avoid issue with the solvent. The paint worked not bad, although the process turned out to be lengthy. Some time I spent on thinking what I need to do, use AK Interactive enamel wash or continue using oil. Searching new solvent in my stash, I returned to applying the oil wash, carefully distributing it to the turret and hull of the tank. And everything was going well until I noticed that even the new product was struggling to remove the oil paint. It mixes the paint well, but it doesn't remove the excess. I had to resort to extreme measures. I used a regular hand sanitizer to remove the excess. However, I need to warn you, the sanitizer can react with acrylic paint, and it's just mixing it with oil. Although the method worked, but in some places I had to apply a thin layer of grey paint for correction. But enough about the wash, let's move on to paint the additional details. I started with the lock on the left side of the tank, painting it in the base color of chocolate brown. Then I added a shade of tan earth to the raised parts to create a worn effect and give it volume. I also lightly highlighted the red tarp under the locks, so that it stands out. Next is the box with grenades. I painted it in olive green, without any complex effect, just planning to add a little bit highlight later. Then I moved on to an interesting detail on the back of the tank. Another ammo box, which I choose to paint in the base color of tan earth. For the shadow I used chocolate brown, applying the dry brush technique and an acrylic thinner to create a smooth transition between the color and the shadow. In the final stage I applied a light color to the protruding corners of the box for additional volume. After the box I moved on to the helmet on the left side of the turret, covered with camouflage fabric. I wanted to create a realistic camouflage, but the result was unsuccessful, so I added a green shade and left it as is, hoping the wash would improve the situation. I also added light shades to small details, such as the canteens and mess tin. They look a bit strange for now, but the wash will smooth out the roughness. At this stage the model looks decent for 1/72 scale, without claiming perfection, but it's not the worst option either. Now I just need to finalize a few details, starting with the second tarp. After researching, I found out that German tarps were usually light, because they are made from linen, so I choose a light coffee color with light touch of green for contrast against the white. After the base layer dried, I added light highlights to the raised corners to create volume. Next I painted the fuel cans on the right side of the tank. According to information from the internet, German fuel cans were red, but I don't want to use, for example, scarlet red, and I choose shadow flash. For the rear part of MG machine gun I added a wood tone, while the ammo boxes were painted in olive green, according to photos I found online. Then I painted the tow cable in medium rust, adding light rust for variety. After that I added a warning effect using light rust paint, to give the cans a slightly withered look. The grey jerry can on the left side received even more damage, since those cans were often used to transport kerosene and were constantly moved around. As a final touch, I light damaged the ammo boxes to complete the work on the rear equipment. Now that all the additional details are painted, I'm moving on to chipping. I'm using the sponge method. I mixed a lighter shade than the base color. After that I applied it to the expected areas of wear. There are many damages since the tank had sunk quite a bit before arriving in the Soviet Union. The result looked like a varied base color with a weathered effect. Next I painted the tools on the right side using the same method as with the rear box. Then I take a fine brush to paint the rust. There is not much rust, but with this tool I wasn't able to make it as fine as I'd like. I also repainted the can on the right side, which was printed on my 3D printer. Thankfully, it fits nicely into the model. Now we need to talk about a small problem. The box I made by hand turned out a bit smaller than the original on photo, therefore the standard decal from the kit didn't match, and I decided to hand paint the insignia of German army. It's difficult to show the whole process since I need to hold the model close to my face for careful work. But here is what I managed. It's not perfect but quite acceptable. Here I followed the usual theme for my 1/72 scale model. First I applied dark rust, then medium rust with the dry brushing method. After that I added a bit of light rust, but I might have overdone it, as the light rust looks a bit bright. Nevertheless, for the 1/72 scale the result is acceptable. With the tracks I decided to try a new approach. I left them in the primer color, and only lightly treated them with a dry brush, adding a rust and wear effect. This time, instead of silver, I used gunmetal grey. It looks better here, I think. But you can judge the result for yourself. In the end, I decided to apply the decals with the tank number, although it's not an exact copy of the photo shown at the beginning of the video. where the number was 1023. My model will have number 102, which is better than leaving it without any marking or trying to paint the number by hand. And as you can see, the applied decal had some bubbles and misalignments. It didn't sit perfectly on the pins, and without the decal setter, achieving perfect adhesion is difficult. Now we switch to the chassis. And after painting and applying the wash to the chassis, I decided to add a bit dirt effect with black wash, creating light splatters. Although I overdid it a bit, I managed to quickly fix it with a cloth, keeping the upper part of the model clean. Now it's time for weathering. I don't plan to heavily dirty the model, but I will add a wet matte effect, as the photo and the future diorama have a very dirty environment. The tank shows sign of both wet and dry matte, so I needed to recreate both effects. I use pigment with matte varnish to simulate dry matte, and pigment with glossy varnish will represent wet matte. The dry matte should be light to avoid blending with the background, while the wet matte should be darker for contrast. I first applied dry matte to the rear and front of the tank, as well as the chassis. Then I carefully added the wet effect. It's important not to cover the effect that have already been applied. But since the diorama will feature a muddy landscape, the tank should look appropriate. I also slightly dirtied the log and added splashes for an overall effect. And after drying, the model achieved a realistic muddy appearance. Next I attach the figures. And now that's it, my friends. If you are wondering where I get the models for various boxes and cans, most of them I make myself and share on my Patreon for free. Also, I share it on Cults and Thingiverse. I also plan to create a paid set of World War II themed accessories for dioramas, which will include furniture, different accessories, accessories for your tanks, accessories for your dioramas, and all of these items can be placed everywhere on your works. With that, thank you for watching, check out my resources, where you can find plenty of interest content. Also check out my Patreon. As always, this was Vlad from the No Quality channel. See you soon!